Compassionate Approaches to Crisis webinar series. And today's webinar is called The Living Room, a peer-run program for people in distress and crisis. Our presenter is Keith Scott from Advocates, and I'm Shira Collings. I'll be the host. I'm the youth coordinator at the National Empowerment Center. So if you want to move to the next slide. I'm just going to go over some general housekeeping before we get started. This webinar was developed in part under this grant from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The views, opinions, and content expressed in this presentation do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of the Center for Mental Health Services, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So this webinar will be recorded. The PowerPoint presentation and the audio recording will be posted on our website. That's power2u.org. So at the end of the webinar, there will be a Q&A session. You're invited to ask questions at any time through the question function, and questions will be taken in the order they're received. You're also welcome to make comments using the chat function. I did just want to give you a heads up that we may not get to all of the questions. I think we have over 400 people signed up for this webinar, but we'll try to get to everyone. So I want to introduce our presenter. As Vice President of Peer Support and Self-Advocacy, Keith Scott is responsible for developing and overseeing peer support and self-advocacy for the entire organization, as well as oversight of all human rights mechanisms. His goal is to create and nurture an effective means of providing support for the voices of all the people we serve while maintaining a vibrant and vigilant human rights program to ensure that the rights of everyone we serve are respected and preserved. Prior to his promotion in 2015, Keith worked for Advocates Mental Health Division for more than 20 years as a program director, administrative director, director of clinical services, and most recently, director of recovery and peer support. Under his direction, the peer specialist team within the Mental Health Division has garnered recognition as an exemplary model and one that truly adheres to the values and principles of peer support. Keith holds a bachelor's degree in Human Services Administration from Springfield College and is a certified psychosocial rehabilitation practitioner and a certified peer specialist. Thanks so much, and I'll turn it over to Keith.
So good afternoon, everybody. As Shira said, my name is Keith Scott, and I'm the Vice President of Peer Support and Self-Advocacy at Advocates. I'd like to share just a little bit about myself before we kind of get into the presentation, just so you kind of know, kind of where I come from and sort of what's motivated me to do this work. I started to become involved in the mental health system probably 14 or 15 years old, and I'm 59 now. My initial experiences largely were about being told what was wrong with me. When I couldn't figure out for myself, how to comfort the people who were worried about my behavior, I quickly began to become familiar with hospitalizations and not voluntary hospitalizations. When you're a minor, you really don't have any rights. And then as I sort of progressed into adulthood, I became court involved and criminal justice involved, which significantly complicates things sort of around the maintenance of one's emotional health and mental health. That sort of continued off and on. A lot of small private acute hospitalizations, a couple of longer state hospitalizations, Vermont, New Hampshire, Ohio, some experience with going to jail for short periods of time. Fast forward to, I think I was 24 years old, 23, 24 years old. And I went through this period of about 3 consecutive years of various forms of incarceration. So I had been involved in an incident where I was arrested and actually the victim of a pretty significant police brutality. Ended up with some broken bones, ended up in the hospital. ended up being committed to a state psychiatric institution in Cleveland, Ohio, where I stayed for 13 months. The morning I was discharged from that facility, I was taken in the back of a sheriff's deputy's car to the Mansfield State Penitentiary, where I did another 13 months after having appeared in court. And then I was given an early release pending the completion of a mandatory drug treatment program in Stoughton, Mass, called Straight Incorporated. And I graduated from that program in 10 months. They used the term graduated. I used the term released. And about 2 years after I graduated from that program, the state of Massachusetts shut it down for human rights violations. So throughout this process, I kind of felt like I was at the mercy of a system that didn't really understand me, that didn't seem even interested in trying to understand me. It was really all about trying to make me fit in to the social norms, to their expectations, to the expectations of people around me. Very compliance oriented around, attendance at meetings and taking medications, attending groups, those kinds of things. And as many of you can imagine, I'm sure it just wasn't helpful to me. I didn't really know anything about peer support. I didn't really know that it was a movement that had been sort of going on since the 40s with respect to people in the mental health system. I didn't know how it could be beneficial. I didn't know how I could participate in it. So about 3 years after that basically 3-year period of incarceration, I was given an opportunity to volunteer at a local community mental health center in downtown Framingham. I would go there. I was recruited by somebody I met in drug treatment, and I would go there on Saturdays and Sundays, and I would just spend time with people. We'd go out in the community, and I didn't have any credential to do this work, but they were interested in me because they knew about my lived experience, and I wanted to be a part of it. I think when I look back on some of my longer state hospitalizations, the people that I was hospitalized with were my closest friends in the world. And when I got out finally and had an opportunity to maybe help other people see that there was hope, I was thrilled to have that opportunity. And so I worked there for a couple of years, and then I was recruited by a woman at Advocates who was opening a brand new program. And she recruited me for my lived experience as well. So my first job at Advocates was actually as a direct support staff who was expected to and who wanted to, share my lived experience with the people that were living in the program. And I did that. It was incredibly satisfying. And I think I did it well. I did it certainly well enough to be promoted. And over time, what happened to me was, when you come out of 3 years of being locked up, you don't really think that you have a lot of prospects for a meaningful and satisfying future. I didn't think anybody would ever hire me. I didn't think I would, meet anybody who wanted to be in a relationship with me. So I had all these ideas, in my head. And as I started to have a little bit of success at Advocates and I was promoted, I started to think that what I really wanted was to not have people see me as someone who had been in hospitals or somebody who had a mental illness. And I'm using air quotes when I use the term mental illness. I kind of wanted to have a different identity. I didn't want people to see me as that. And so for a number of years, for many years, in a number of the roles that Shira referenced in the bio, I didn't talk about my lived experience. I would occasionally share it with people that I supported, and sometimes that didn't end well. I remember sharing my lived experience with a gentleman that I'd been supporting for a while, who often felt like he wanted to end his life. I shared with him that on a number of occasions I tried to end my life, so I thought that would be comforting to him. He got on the phone with other people at the organization and said he didn't feel comfortable working with me because I was mentally ill and I had tried to kill myself, and how was that helpful to him? And after that, I just basically kept that information and that experience to myself. And over time, I became progressively more disappointed in myself, feeling like I was trying to live a lie, trying to be somebody that I wasn't. And about 13 years ago, the woman who hired me, senior vice president of community services at Advocates, she had this vision of creating peer support services and integrating those into the mental health services that we were providing people. And she hired me and gave me the support and a lot of freedom, a lot of latitude to create the kind of program that I thought would be best for us. And the first thing I did was, I got in contact with people that I knew who were doing this work in the community, who had been doing it for a really long time, people who were prominent in Massachusetts as individuals with lived experience who were trying to continue to push peer support forward into the mainstream, oftentimes at great expense to themselves. And I asked them, like, what would you do if you had this opportunity? And they gave me a lot of incredibly good advice and a lot of incredibly good ideas. And I sort of pieced those together along with sort of the ethics and the training I received from the Transformation Center to start to form a program at Advocates to provide peer support to people. And we've been doing that for 13 years. And that program has grown from me and one part-time person to, I think we have 34 people on the team between peer specialists and recovery coaches. And the work that those people do is incredibly valuable, and I'm incredibly proud of them. But as the program has evolved, we started to see things around the country that were being created, like peer-run respites. And a colleague, a person that that has been incredibly helpful to me in educating me and supporting me to do this work, Sarah Davidow from the Western Mass Recovery Learning Community. She told me that they were getting a contract to open a peer-run respite in Northampton, Massachusetts, which is on the other end of the state for those of you not from Massachusetts. And that was incredibly exciting as a development, as a place people could go and get support from peers, from people working in peer roles exclusively, and to not be evaluated or assessed to come in. There was no referral necessary. They could come and go as they pleased. It just seems like such an ideal way to support people beyond a couple of hours of meeting with a peer specialist a week or meeting with a recovery coach a week, a couple of hours a week. And so we wanted something like that. We wanted to create something like that. And a couple of times since that occurred, requests for proposals sent out by the Department of Mental Health in Massachusetts offered opportunities to do this, but always with the caveat, and I agree with this, that the organization running the peer-run respite needed to be truly peer-run. 51% of the board being people who identify as lived experience, people, administrators actually overseeing the administrative piece of the program being people with lived experience, and all of the staff being people with lived experience. And that's not something that we were, and it's not something that we really could do because we're not a peer-run organization. And so we were looking for something else. And this opportunity came up to bid on a living room program, a model that I had heard about. I think it started in Skokie, Illinois back in 1997, and it sprung up in a variety of states across the country, Delaware, Arizona, California, amongst others. And I started to do some research on the living room, and I thought, if we can't run a peer-run respite, this would be the next best thing. And at least it would open the door to gaining some experience about how to do this and to collect data on how valuable this might be to people as an alternative. Again, my lived experience taught me that most of the responses that were typical, the people would typically experience when in crisis, when having difficulty, were things like being forced into the hospital, having police come, being evaluated by clinicians. And I never found that terribly helpful. And I know numbers of the people that I've spoken to and I've supported over the years have also had experiences in which they felt that that was not helpful. In fact, oftentimes they felt it was harmful, being treated by the police in ways that were at the very least disrespectful, being brought to emergency rooms where people would often be sequestered in a different part of the emergency room. There would often be security watching them. The door couldn't be closed. They could often be there for hours, days, in some cases weeks, kind of waiting for a disposition. Even if after the initial crisis abated and they wanted to go home, they weren't cleared to go home, they still couldn't leave. And so we felt like this was a real opportunity to offer something different to people and to really make sure that it was about what they want and what they found helpful. And so we got this contract from the Mass Behavioral Health Partnership. It's part of a partnership that we have internally with our Psychiatric Emergency Services department. And we started off by looking for a site. And we chose a site in Framingham. We looked for about 6 months, chose a site in Framingham. And we chose Framingham because one, we knew there was need there. We also knew that we wanted the program to be accessible via public transportation. So it's on a bus line. Bus drives right past the house. It's probably a mile from the commuter rail. It's probably 3 miles from our clinic, which also houses our psychiatric emergency services team. It's 2 blocks from the hospital. So it was an ideal location, and the building offered us the ideal environment to create this kind of warm, hospitable, living room-like place where people could come of their own free will. They could stay as little or as long as they want. And they would receive their support exclusively from peer specialists. There are other living room programs around the country that function in different ways. Some of them are not open 24/7. Some of them house their living room program inside their larger mental health agency. Some have clinical staff on site all of the time, nurses, therapists, psychologists. We didn't want to do any of those things because, again, we were really committed to this idea of creating a separate, distinct and unique place and environment in which people could come and not have to feel like they were walking into a community mental health facility or a private nonprofit human services organization. Because, again, I think a lot of people have had the experience, I've had the experience, that those places are a part of this kind of monolithic mental health system. And we didn't want to have potential barriers to people feeling like they could just come on their own and that they didn't have to, walk past a receptionist, and they didn't have to put on a badge, and they didn't have to walk around in a building, where people had keys on their belts, and just those kinds of things. Our commitment was really to remove as many barriers as we possibly could. And so we decided a number of things. We decided, as is the case with our peer support services in general, that we really wanted the focus to be on mutuality, the mutuality of the shared lived experience between the peer specialist providing support at the living room and the people coming there for support. And by that, I mean, we don't have true mutuality with the people that we support because we get paid and they don't. And we're very transparent about that. This isn't friendship. It can often feel like friendship, and members of the team, and myself included, have great affinity for the people that we work with. I would even go as far to say that we have love for the people that we work with. But it's not true friendship, and because one gets paid and one doesn't, it can't be true friendship. But we didn't want to place any other barriers to that mutuality. So we don't read charts about people before we meet them. We really don't read charts at all. We don't write clinical notes about people. We don't do assessments or evaluations. We don't have any opinion about whether people should take medication or not, or which medications they should take. That's completely their business. We don't have anything to do with what people do with their money. That's their business, or it's between them and anybody who's helping them to manage that money, but we have no opinion about how people should spend their money. We don't take restraint training, or what is, I think, euphemistically referred to as crisis intervention training often, which includes, I think, always a component of physical intervention, which is restraint from our perspective. And many of us have had the direct experience, the personal experience of being restrained, and we know how traumatic that is, and it's not helpful to the development of a trusting relationship with professionals. And we believe in the autonomy of adult human beings, and that you shouldn't put your hands on adult human beings. So we don't do that. And we've adhered as strictly as possible. It's not perfect, but to this ethic of we don't have meetings about people unless they're present. And again, the reason for that is probably obvious to you, but it's because if this is all about providing support to a person who's coming to you for support, then how do you justify ever having a conversation about that support, about that person, without them participating, without them in the room? So those were the things that we decided that we were going to commit to and hold the line on in order to provide the kind of peer support that we want to provide. And that is true in the living room as well. It's why we don't have any clinical staff there. It's why we don't have nurses there. We can access people. We can access psychiatric emergency services if a guest wants that. But we won't call on people without their permission. We don't have psychiatric emergency services clinicians come to the living room because that kind of creates this situation in which people perhaps could feel like it's not a safe space. It's not truly what we claim that it is. So what I'm hoping that you'll get out of this presentation, and I'm extremely nervous, and when I get nervous, I tend to ramble. And so I hope somebody will reach out to me and let me know if that's happening. But I'd be surprised if members of my team who are taking part don't write into the chat, hey, you're starting to ramble. I hope people will understand what the living room is as we run it and what it offers people, our guests who come there. I want people to understand exactly what people can expect when they come there in terms of support and access to information and resources when they're visiting. One of the aspects of the contract that funds this program asks us to gather data on guests' experiences, and I can explain a little bit later about how we do that and still adhere to our ethics and values. And I'll share some of that data if you're interested in, and I can provide a lot more information if people want. Like at the last slide has my contact information, and if people want to reach out to me, I can send them all kinds of written material that we have that might be helpful to you. So as I said, the model is a hospitality model. It's an option for people who've maybe only ever had a traditional respite or community crisis stabilization program that they've used when they're in crisis or they're having a difficult time. It's an alternative to, as I said before, people going into the emergency room and having an experience that's not only not helpful, but in some ways, continues to reinforce these ideas that you're not like other people, that it's okay to circumvent and take away your rights at this moment in time when you're particularly vulnerable. And then sort of the follow-up to going to emergency rooms for folks is often involuntary hospitalization. And many people, again, myself included, have found that to sort of be an aspect of the system that continues to oppress people. And fundamentally, I think what we believe is, and sometimes I'm puzzled as to why people don't sort of grasp this concept more often. It's just not helpful for the relationship between people who want to provide help to someone in crisis and the person needing and wanting help in crisis. It sort of creates this situation in which you don't feel as though you can be truly honest, because your experience is, if you're truly honest and you tell people what's truly going on for you, whether you're hearing voices, whether you're severely depressed and thinking about ending your life, if you're honest with professionals generally, you're concerned that they're going to take control of your life from you. And that is often the experience that people have when in crisis and using sort of these traditional places like respite, emergency rooms, hospitalizations. Now, of course, one of the reasons we've received funding for this is because there's a strong emphasis recently, perhaps, on diverting people from emergency rooms, cost containment. Is that a corollary benefit to what we do? Absolutely, it is. Treatment in an emergency room or in a hospital can be incredibly expensive and also potentially damaging to folks. So this is, for us, kind of a win-win. We help reduce the cost of treatment that people are wanting and needing, and we're providing them something else, something that could be more meaningful, something in which they don't have to surrender control over their lives and their decisions to receive. This is a peer support program. It's, as I said, it's mutuality based. And we believe fundamentally that having difficulty or being in crisis is not something that needs to be medicated away and eradicated as quickly as possible. Although the intention behind that, I understand is good. People want to end someone's suffering as quickly as possible. We feel like it's a real opportunity. It's a real opportunity for people to explore why what's happening is happening, explore what the meaning of their experience at that moment is, and to do so with support in a place where they can spend time contemplating this, thinking this through, talking it through with other people who've had similar experiences, so that it's a process by which they become progressively more empowered over themselves, over their lives, over the experiences that they have. And then from that moment forward, understanding the value of peer support, have an option on an ongoing basis, not just when they're at the living room, but after they leave the living room. So if you think about a time in your life when you felt overwhelmed, when you felt like you were in crisis, when you were perhaps experiencing feelings of wanting to end your life, feeling hopeless, feeling anxious, feeling fearful, who and what was helpful to you during that time? That's the kind of question that we ask ourselves, and that form the basis, for the way in which we interact with people. Who and what was helpful to you during that time? A lot of the folks we see at the living room have expressed that nobody's asked them that question before. That folks, that professionals with experience and education and credentials often know what's helpful to people based on their professional training and their education. And again, none of this is done with malice, but people feel like they were never asked, like, what happened? What was helpful to you in the past, and what would be helpful to you now? And it's really important that we make this distinction between what people ordinarily would seek out and use, basically because a dearth of services that are designed to really respond to the person, as a whole person, and not as sort of the sum total of their distress or their symptoms. We start by meeting the person where they are, and letting that person define what's going on for them, and figure out what support would be helpful from us. We try to create a judgment-free, trauma-sensitive, safe, welcoming, hospitable, comfortable, non-clinical, and flexible environment. I know that's a lot, but that is our mission. When people knock on the door, there's no referral necessary to come to the living room. It is completely voluntary. We don't want people being told they need to go to the living room, or we don't want somebody coming out of the hospital, being led out of the hospital, pending a step down to the living room, so that they walk through the door feeling like, well, my social worker told me if I wanted to get out of the hospital, I needed to agree to come here. I'm not really sure what you do or why I'm here, but we want people to come because they want to be there, because they understand the value of being there relative to the value of their other experiences when they're having difficulty. We are extremely committed to this idea of creating a safe, warm, welcoming, and trauma-sensitive space. When people come into the program, they knock on the door, they ring the doorbell. The very first thing is that they're greeted, hopefully with a smile. They're welcomed. You're welcome to be here. We want you to be here. People come in. One of the first things that we do is we try to ask them, are you hungry? Are you thirsty? Can we get you something to eat or something to drink? Do you want to just kind of sit for a bit and sit quietly if you want, watch the TV if you want, just to sort of get comfortable. We give people the quick tour. It's a very quick tour, as the space is relatively small. Takes about 15 to 30 seconds to tour the living room. But we want people to, basically see the amenities such as they are. We have a small library of books that people can read. We have a small library of DVDs that people can watch. We have a computer that's just dedicated to the guests that they can use to go on to check their email, or get the news, or look for a job, whatever it is that they want to do. We have games that people can play if they choose. It's really all about having some things in the environment, that are not mental health related, but are the kinds of things that people out in the world do when they're having a difficult time, that they find comforting, that they find a helpful distraction, right? And then once we've done that, we sit down with a person and we go over an entrance agreement. That's kind of what we call it. And the entrance agreement just sort of spells out as explicitly as we can, without overwhelming people, what you can expect from us while you're here, and frankly, what we expect from you. Our commitment to creating and maintaining this safe, trauma-sensitive environment means that we want to really engage our guests who are there for support for their own difficulties and their own crisis, to start to think about how to be part of a community of people who are supporting one another. And not just, it's a place where you come, get support for yourself and leave. It can be that, it absolutely can be that. But we're trying to create a community of people who want to support one another. We've had situations in where we've had multiple guests at the living room, and one guest was feeling like the living room supports were not enough for her, and felt like she really wanted to go to the hospital, to the emergency room. And we had another guest go with her. And we thought, this is fantastic. This is really everything that we hoped we would be able to start doing, so that people see themselves not just as an individual needing help and getting help, but also as a person that's part of a community that can also provide help and provide support, because there's tremendous meaning in that for people. The whole reason I got interested in doing this work was because of, again, the folks on the unit, not necessarily the staff, although sometimes they were helpful. But the other people on the unit, who we would sort of join together, and we'd bond around the fact that we were locked in a hospital, we'd share our experiences with each other, and we would become friends, and we would provide support to one another. That's kind of what we've continued to hope that we can develop, and we've seen progress towards that over the 2 years that we've been open. We obviously want to offer choices for people to explore. We want to have a conversation about, personal responsibility and accountability and self-direction, both while people are there, but also kind of when they're not there, and they're at home and they're in the community at large. We try to have conversations with people about what that means and why we think it's so important, just so they can start to consider changing the way that they think. We're really committed to not being another part of a system that creates and fosters dependence. We don't want people to come to the living room feeling like anytime I'm having difficulty, this is the only place I can go to get support. We want to try to help people to explore the possibility of, seeking out support in the broader community outside the mental health system. In order to do that, we provide access to information about anything a person is interested in, jobs that are available, support groups that are out there, educational opportunities, those kinds of things, events that are occurring that people might want to get involved with, clubs that happen out in the community. We want them to be aware of all of the resources that exist. We're not sort of one-stop shopping for everything that a person might need in their life, either that is part of their crisis or when they're not in crisis is something that they're contending with. So we have a very comprehensive list of resources for people who need help because they don't have housing or they don't have safe housing in safe neighborhoods. Assistance with benefits. We have a member of the team who is extremely well connected to the spiritual community, has contacts at churches and synagogues that she reaches out to help people with things like money for electric bill or for heating oil or for weather appropriate clothing, those kinds of things. Assistance with Social Security disability applications and SSI applications, fuel assistance, housing authority applications. We want people to be aware that those resources exist and that we can help them get connected to those resources if they want. And we'll support them through that process. It's not like we just hand them a sheet of paper and say good luck to them. We kind of review the resources that they're interested in. And if they want support to use those, we're happy to do that. We're focused on creating connection to the larger community. Again, this idea that we want people to have the ability to create support for themselves, to create friendships and relationships that are not based on the fact that they have a diagnosis or that they're involved in the mental health system. Places where they can actually develop friendships, that they could develop intimate relationships with people, because that happens very rarely inside the mental health system. And we want people to see, hopefully, that crisis and personal challenges can be opportunities for growth if people have the things that they need, access to information, support, and that they're able to maintain control over their lives, over their decisions, their autonomy, their personal agency. As I said, we only have peer specialists on staff. Everybody who works there is a certified peer specialist. If they're not a certified peer specialist when we hire them, then they certainly have the requisite lived experience to be in the role and the requisite experience of having moved through however they felt they wanted to do so, through their experience, through crises, through the system if they're involved in the public system, and are now using that experience to support other people. We have as a guideline that if you're not certified when we hire you, that we give you a full calendar year, and we provide as much support as we can to make sure that you're applying for the training and that you get into the training. I'll get more into training in a little bit. So we don't have any clinical staff on site because we don't, again, want people to come in there and see a nurse and think to themselves, well, this is the same old, they're just calling it a different thing, marketing as a different service. We want people to come in and we want them to believe what it is that we're saying about the environment that we're operating and the program that we're operating, which we can't do if there's a psychiatrist on site, if there's a clinician on site, if there's a nurse on site. Again, we can access all of those things if a person wants, but we don't have them in the living room proper. We see the relationship that we have with people as collaborators. We believe that everybody who comes to the living room is an expert in their own experience. We believe that, again, with support, people can believe that they're entitled to make their own choices. We believe that it is essential to what we do that their experience with us is that they were treated with respect and kindness. We were meeting yesterday, Oryx and Shira and I, to talk about today's presentation. And I said, you know, I could actually do this presentation in probably 90 seconds, because what this really boils down to is kindness, is the golden rule, creating a place where we treat people the way that we would want to be treated. We treat people with kindness, pure and simple, when they're having difficulty, when they're angry, when they're frustrated. We don't exercise control. We don't take people's choices away from them. We don't panic. If a person is really in distress in the moment, we just treat them with kindness. Sometimes that means just leaving people be, letting them sit quietly. We have a space where people can go if there's a lot of activity. And so we have these two adjoining living rooms with couches and a TV. And like I said, the library, and people will often hang out in that space, and they'll talk with peer specialists. And sometimes they'll just sit with peer specialists while they watch a movie or they play a game of cards together. And then we have a separate room if people just want a private, more private space, a quiet space with a door that closes. They can go in. We have recliners in that room where people can sort of, you know, go in and take a nap if they want. Again, the focus is really on connection, and connection through respect and kindness. And that becomes sort of the foundation for whatever support a person receives, wants, and that we provide. We're constantly focused on empowerment, self-advocacy, and personal responsibility. The reason that is we think that people in the public mental health system have not really had opportunities to believe that they're in control of their lives, that they can live their lives and make the kind of choices that everybody else in the world gets to make without consequence. You know, I like I said, I've been receiving mental health services on and off for 45 years. Oftentimes it didn't occur to me that I could demand things, that I didn't have to say yes, that I could say, no, I'm not doing that. I don't want to do that without consequence. One familiar situation, maybe many of you have experienced, is there was one occasion where I was picked up on a Section 12. I had just left an appointment. Didn't go particularly well, as you might imagine. I was driving down the road, and a police car behind me, lights come on. I'm kind of notorious for driving fast. I thought it might have been a speeding violation. Officer comes up to the car and he just says to me, I need you to get out of the car. And I said, was I speeding? Like, what did I do? He's like, don't make this more difficult on yourself than it needs to be. Just please get out of the car. I get out of the car, he handcuffs me, he puts me in the back of his car. He drives me to the emergency room. I sit in the emergency room with my hands cuffed behind my back for probably 3.5 hours, maybe 4 hours, before anybody came in to even talk to me. And when a clinician finally came in to talk to me, he offered me a choice. That's obviously not really a choice. Either voluntarily go to the hospital or involuntarily go to the hospital. Those are not the kinds of things that empower a person to make choices for themselves. Those are not the kind of things that, you know, engender trust between the system and the professionals that work in the system and the people who need the support from that system, because they don't have other choices. We focus on personal responsibility and accountability a lot because we also believe in the soft bigotry of low expectations. You know, we want people to understand when they come into the program, we are going to treat them with kindness and respect, and we want them to treat other guests and the peer specialists with respect and kindness as well. We understand that people are having a difficult time, but because we're committed to creating an environment which is safe and trauma informed, it's really necessary that people understand what kind of program it is, what it offers, what we expect from folks, and what it's not. Again, it's not the kind of program where somebody can come in and be violent, whether that's physical violence or verbal violence. It's not the kind of program where people can come in and do property damage, because we have other guests who are there because they need a safe space. And so we're constantly negotiating that, but we always try to negotiate it with kindness. And obviously we take this approach of, what happened to you and how can we be helpful, rather than, what is your diagnosis, what's wrong with you, that kind of thing. So as I said before, we welcome people in, we review the guidelines of mutual respect, accountability, independence for oneself. When people come in, if they're on medications, we don't have anything to do with their medications. They're responsible for keeping their medications and doing whatever it is that they do with them on their own, and being responsible for those so that they're not lying around in the community, that kind of thing. We, again, review what people can expect and what not to expect. And we talk with people about, this may not be what you want or what you feel like you need. And that's okay. You can stay here and you can work together, and you can take time to figure it out. If after 15 minutes you want to leave, you're free to leave. We don't call anybody and let them know that you left. It's your choice. If you want to stay, and several hours into your stay, you decide, what, this isn't really what I thought it was. I feel like I need more than I'm getting here. We'll sit down with you and try to figure out what that is, and then we'll try to get you connected to that service or that support, and we'll accompany you. For instance, if somebody wants to be evaluated because they really feel like they need to be in the hospital, we can contact our psychiatric emergency services team. We can drive them over to the office. We can meet with them there, or we can ask to meet at someplace else in the community. We just won't have clinicians come to the program. But if a person wants that, we want to help facilitate that for them. If a person wants to go to the hospital, to the emergency room, we can walk them over there. It's, like I said, 2 blocks away. We had a situation just late yesterday afternoon, where a person was in medical distress and asked us to call 911. If a person asks us to do that, we're going to do that, despite the fact that we really want to try to avoid having police cars and EMTs and fire trucks roll up on the house with the lights and the sirens, because again, that kind of feeds into this sort of this stigma problem of, like, now do I want to go there? Like, what do the neighbors think because the police were there again? And this seems redundant. We just want to ask folks how we can support them. If they want to be there and they don't feel like they need something else, what do they need from us while they're there? Flexibility is a big part of what we're committed to. We understand that oftentimes services are inflexible, maybe because of limitations placed on them by the contract or the funding source, or by concerns about liability, those kinds of things. Oftentimes, we have a set of guidelines for operating the program. They're not rules, they're not etched in stone. Oftentimes we can bend those guidelines if that's what someone needs and that's what someone wants. An example that came up recently is there's a woman that we were supporting through peer specialists who don't work at the living room. And this person was in distress and feeling like they wanted to end their life. And they had a team meeting coming up, and the person was super anxious about the team meeting. And so they got intoxicated. They drank and they got very intoxicated. And that just exacerbated the worry that the clinical team had about them. And a decision was made in the moment that there were really no other choices but to Section 12 the person, which is an involuntary transport to a hospital emergency room to be evaluated. And the person desperately didn't want that. And it was actually going to take a bad situation and potentially make it worse. And so the peer specialist reached out and said, is there any way we could offer something different? Because it seems like the only choice this person has is to be sectioned to the hospital when that's not what they want and that's not going to be helpful to them. And I said, let me see what's going on at the living room. And I called over and I spoke to Ebony Flint, who runs the living room. And I said, do we have any guests there? And she said, no. And I said, okay, so here's what I'm thinking. We have a guideline that says that we won't admit people to the living room who are under the influence, because again, this commitment to a safe and trauma-informed environment. But if there are no other guests there and we commit to not having any other guests there, could we provide transportation for her to come to the living room, be with people, not have to be transported to the hospital, and just kind of see if that's helpful. If it's not, we always have this kind of fallback plan that sort of, that our clinical team was advocating for. And we did that. We were able to do that. And questions came up like, wait, I thought it was a rule that we don't admit. It's not a rule, it's a guideline. And if being flexible about that allows us to offer support that could not otherwise be offered there, then we have a commitment to doing that. As I said, some living room programs are, just sort of 9 to 5. Some of them are 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. Some of them have places where people can sleep and some of them don't. Our living room program is 24/7. We felt like, given that we couldn't operate a peer-run respite, that we wanted the living room to be 24/7. It's available to anybody in the community, not just people served by advocates and not just people served by other local providers. It's open to anyone from any city or town who wants to come there. We have people from probably 25 or 30 different towns over the 2 years that we've been open who've come there. Boston, Springfield, Greenfield, North Shore, the Cape. And we've had people come from all over the place to use it. And we want to be available 24/7. No referral is needed. We don't even use the word referral. People in services will call up and say, how do I refer someone? You don't have to. You can tell them they can just come by the house, knock on the door, and we'll welcome them in and we'll talk about what it is that they want or they need. You can have them call us directly. You can have them text us. All sorts of ways people can get connected with us to talk about coming to the program. We really try not to use the language of the system. We don't use diagnostic language. We don't use pathologizing language. That's really important to creating the kind of environment that we want to create. People have the option, if they want, to talk about spending the night. Again, we have guidelines for that, not hard and fast rules. We'd like for people, if they're interested in spending the night, to have a conversation with us about it before 9 or 10 o'clock at night, because overnight stays do require a call to the 24-hour on-call person, who is also a peer specialist. For most of the time, it's been me. And that's really just to see how many other guests are there. We're single staffed on the overnight, and so I want to make sure that the overnight peer specialist feels comfortable. It feels like the situation is not overwhelming. It can be really difficult to have 2 or 3 or 4 people spending the night when you're the only person on and multiple people are needing support from you. So we just want to check in, and that's why we asked the on-call person sort of walk us through that and make sure that everybody feels comfortable. We just check in about what else might be going on in the environment, those kinds of things. I don't think we've ever said no to a person. And again, we have a guideline that says, we prefer that people not come to the program after 10 p.m. Again, as we get into the overnight situation. Again, that's another rule. We've had people who did not have housing in the middle of the winter, who just did not have a place to stay, and they showed up late. And of course, we're going to welcome people in. We're not going to let somebody stay on the street under those conditions. We have a 2-night maximum stay as a guideline. We bend that all the time. If we don't have other overnight guests and somebody really needs to stay 3 or 4 nights, I think the maximum might have been 5 nights. Again, I'm sure the folks who work at the living room will correct me if I'm wrong about that. But we've bent that guideline because it's important that we're flexible. It's really important that people see us as a place that's flexible, because all too often folks hear, nope, I'm sorry, we can't do that. Nope, I'm really sorry. That's not what we are. That's not what we can do. Again, we can't do everything, but there's certainly plenty of opportunities for us to be flexible in the support that we're providing people. And because we're 24/7, phone support's available to folks in the community anytime, day or night. We have 2 phone lines that people can call, and oftentimes folks have a lot of difficulty, even when they're home in their apartment or in their group home, getting through the night. The hours between like 11 p.m. and 8 o'clock in the morning are particularly difficult because there are very, very few, if any, resources. There are plenty of warm lines that are advertised, but most of those wrap up at 8 p.m. or 10 p.m. They don't typically go 24/7. And since we have an overnight person, and since sometimes that overnight person, we don't have any guests, they're available to take calls, to talk to people who are anxious at 2 o'clock in the morning, or who are feeling hopeless at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And we're particularly proud of that. And we've seen a lot of the usage of the living room is done through phone, and most recently, the last 5.5 months, through the virtual safe spaces, they're called, which Ebony and the team at the living room created. Currently, I think we have 24 virtual safe spaces that take place throughout the entire week at various times during each and every day. Virtual safe spaces that are about hearing voices, virtual safe spaces that are about alternatives to suicide, that are about being Black and brown in the community, that are about being LGBTQ in the community, that are about, you know, people who like gaming, people who want to talk about movies, people who want to play music, all of those, 24 groups weekly. And recently we've had requests and participation from people in California, in Florida, in New York, and the Philippines, and Bangladesh. Ebony was telling me this morning or yesterday about a woman who reached out to her, who's in the armed forces, who's stationed in Japan, who wants to participate and wants to share the information about these safe spaces with the entire base. And we're thrilled that extension of the support that's provided at the living room, at the site of the living room, is being extended worldwide. Training and staffing for the living room. We have 1 full-time peer program coordinator who runs the program, who's on site. That's Ebony Flint that I referred to. We have 7 full-time peer specialists and 1 part-time peer specialist who make up the staff. Like I said before, we want people to be certified. If they're not certified when they start, we make sure that they're certified within their first year. In addition to that training and certification, we are very, very enthusiastic about our training for folks. We have brought intentional peer support, the 5-day intentional peer support training to the organization. We want to have all of our peer specialists, not just the ones working at the living room, trained in intentional peer support. We train people in trauma-informed care, cultural competency, housing supports, substance use and addiction support, CPR, first aid, human rights is incredibly important. We have training and a philosophy that we call intentional care, that is really all about how do people who are not in peer roles work in ways that support people's recovery and are attentive to the things that they do that can either support a person's recovery or be a potential barrier to that recovery. OSHA, fire safety, disaster response, corporate compliance, deaf culture, and of course HIPAA. One of the things that we really value and that we are very vigilant about is the privacy of guests. Guests do not have to tell us their name when they come in. We ask. We ask people if they wouldn't mind, and if people are at all concerned about it, we let them know that. Sorry, that's my dog. We let them know that it's not required. Sometimes they think about it and they reconsider, and sometimes people would just prefer to remain anonymous. Each person that's on the team, this is true for the living room, but it's also true for the larger team, In addition to the orientation to the organization and to the program, we train through shadowing. So we have a new peer specialist basically paired with a more experienced peer specialist, so that in addition to all the sort of manualized trainings that we provide people, they get sort of on-the-job training with somebody who's been doing the job for a while, and give that person plenty of opportunities to ask as many questions as they want so they start to feel comfortable. We're committed to providing an hour of weekly supervision for every member of the team. We have a larger team meeting which brings together living room staff, all of the rest of our peer specialists and recovery coaches, so that there is a sense of we're all together in this work. We are all connected together. We're a centralized team. People on the team who work as certified peer specialists get supervision from what we call peer support coordinators, who are supervisors. Those folks are certified peer specialists. They get supervision from a director of recovery and peer support, who is also a certified peer specialist. That person gets supervision from me, who's also a certified peer specialist. So we're all, talking the same language. We all understand the same concept. We've all had the same basic trainings, so that we're, in as much as is possible, on the same page about what we're doing and why we're doing it. Again, I sort of went over this earlier about why in Framingham, the centralized location, access to community and public transportation. The program is ADA accessible, so we can accommodate people who are in wheelchairs. Close proximity to other kinds of emergency services in the community. Some we operate, some we don't. We collaborate with the jail diversion program in Framingham, where we have a crisis clinician embedded in the Framingham Police Department. So if there is an issue that involves the police and the living room, we have an advocates person, somebody who knows what we're doing and why we're doing it, who can sort of bridge the relationship between us and the police so that we have the best possible outcomes for people. And now I'll just get into data. We collect data anonymously. We have a data analytics team at the organization. We provide the data to them, and they produce a monthly and annual report. We use that for annual funding reapplication, but we also use it so that we understand how are we doing as a team at the living room. What is the feedback in terms of people's satisfaction with their experience at the living room? We're interested in demographic information because we kind of like to know who's using the program. When are they using the program? We track data on when people come. We're really interested in where would people have gone if the living room was not available to them? And oftentimes the answer is, I'm not sure, or it's the emergency room. I think if you kind of look at diversion, this past fiscal year, we had 267 ER diversions based on the feedback provided when we conduct that survey with folks. And then we want to know how they heard about the living room. One of our biggest challenges from the day we started, which was July 15th of 2018, has been getting the word out, has been marketing this resource, has been doing presentations at police departments and at Framingham State University and with other providers, and basically anywhere we can wrangle an invitation, because we've wanted people to use this service, to be aware of it, to understand what it is. And that's been a significant challenge for us. We've built slowly over the last 2 years the number of people that we support and the number of people who are aware of what it is that we do. In 2019, that first year, we had 1,053 interactions with people in the community, 141 of those unique visits, like first timers. This past fiscal year, that number rose to 4,340 interactions. And so we're moving in the right direction, but still feel often like we're being underutilized. 63% of our guests come in between 8 o'clock in the morning and noontime, 27% between noon and 8 p.m., and then 10% between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. The average length of stay for people is 90 minutes. January, February, and March are, based on data, our busiest months. And based on the voluntary responses to the satisfaction survey, people don't have to fill it out. We don't pressure people. It's a couple of basic questions and then an opportunity for comments. We've had satisfaction range, I think, in the beginning of the first year. The lowest it was 89%. The highest has been 97% of people who would highly recommend the living room for folks in crisis. A couple of the comments, the living room is a great crisis alternative. It also kept me from going to PES or the emergency room for additional levels of care. Having someone to talk to about current problems helps a lot. You have awesome folks here that made it easy to reach out. I love this place. Thank you for creating a warm, family-like retreat we can escape to. So these are obviously a little bit self-serving, but for the most part, people's satisfaction with the program, their reaction, their feedback is overwhelmingly positive, and we ask people to share that with others, not just friends and family, but also their clinical teams that work with them. So I know I've rambled on. I'm hoping that what you got out of this is what it is that the living room that we operate is and what it isn't, how this model is different from the traditional means of responding to people and supporting them through an emotional crisis, why it's important for people to have choices and alternatives, and the experience of our guests with the support that they have received. So I thank you for your attention. I hope I've left some time for questions. And thank you for this opportunity. We're really proud of the program. I'm incredibly proud of the people who run it day and night. They do an outstanding job, and we want as many people to know about this and to try to create this, recreate this in as many places as possible, because we think it's that valuable. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That was an amazing presentation, and we're getting a lot of positive feedback. So we do have a bunch of questions. We'll try to get through as many as possible. Our first question is, who started the peer-run respite in Skokie?
I'll be honest, I don't know who it was. It's a living room program. It's not a peer-run respite in Skokie, Illinois. I'm not sure who the agency was that started it, but as far as I know, and it's entirely possible I'm wrong about this, it's where it first started back in 1997.
Thank you. Our next question asks, I would think having a sign denoting what the building is stigmatizing. Do you have any neighbors looking disparagingly at your guests?
I don't know. It is something that we sort of talked about a lot before doing it. I think what we were concerned about is if we didn't, would people know that it was there, where it was? Would people in crisis be sort of wandering around the neighborhood trying to find us? And so it was one of these places where we, I think, compromised and said, let's do it. We've not, as far as I know, had issues with neighbors. The building is actually located next to our landlord, who is particularly vigilant about the program. He's an attorney. He has a law practice there, and before he leased the property to us, was very, very concerned. I mean, obviously he's coming from this place of really not knowing much about the mental health system, but he was concerned, I'll use his words, that mentally ill and homeless people were going to be lining up in front of the house and that it was going to scare away his clients. That's not happened. We've not got complaints from him. I feel like we have a pretty good relationship with him, generally speaking. And I think over time, he's come to understand what it is that we do and how it's valuable to the community that he also operates a business in and lives in.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. What can be done if someone who is highly emotional becomes physical in order to protect others?
Yeah, that's a really excellent question. That's kind of one of the things that folks were worried about when we were planning to open the living room. It's happened on occasion that people have come there, have agreed to be respectful and accountable while they're in that community, and then for whatever reason have not been able to adhere to that commitment. It depends. Not all peer specialists feel the same about the work and not all peer specialists have the same degree of tolerance for those kinds of things, because everybody's a unique individual, right? So there's some people who, who will try to sort of ride it out a little bit, give the person space. We're really clear when it starts to happen that, we talked about this when you came in. We would really like for you to be able to stay, but we have a commitment to maintaining a safe, trauma-informed environment for all guests. And if you can't adhere to that commitment, we will ask you to leave. We will welcome you back if you're in a different space tomorrow, next week. But for now, it's just not possible for you to be here and us to honor our commitment to creating the space for other people. Generally, people will leave. Sometimes they'll be very angry about it. Sometimes they'll post negative comments on our Facebook page about it. We understand that that's going to happen. It has happened in very, very few instances over the 2 years that we've been open, but it is something that comes up. We have said if we need to, we do have this relationship with the police, and we believe that we can involve police in a way that is going to be as safe as possible, because we have a jail diversion clinician in the Framingham PD. If a person is, threatening and perhaps doing property damage, yelling and screaming, and we ask them politely, kindly to leave, and they refuse, we do let them know that if we have to contact the police, we will. I don't think we've ever had to do that, but it is something that we talk about a lot.
Thank you. What is your experience with allowing children to come into the center with the parent seeking help? In doing research, some areas only allow individuals above 18. We are working on this policy. A lot of the committee believe we would be limiting our outreach for those seeking support.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. It's something that we've wrestled with as well. Currently, we only serve adults, so 18 and up. I mean, we've been in discussion around, again, this flexibility issue, that if it were someone in dire need who wanted to be there and we had no other guests, but they didn't have childcare, could we, again, bend the guideline and make an exception? I'd like to believe that we could. I don't want to say that just in case my boss is listening, but I feel like that is something that we want to be able to provide, because we know that is the situation for some folks. And people coming from lived experience, all of the team members, they feel deeply about their commitment to this work, and they understand how awful it feels to say to someone who has children who wants to come, we're really sorry, we only serve adults. Nobody likes doing that. Currently, that is our situation, but we are exploring options to allow us, in certain circumstances, to be able to let someone come in who wants to be there, needs to be there, but has a child. So we're working on that, but that's an excellent question. It's something that we wish we were able to do.
That's great. You're exploring the option.
Yeah.
Is there a protocol and policies that you could share? We are opening a recovery community center with a similar structure and would love to see if there are foreseeable things we did not think about.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said before, my contact information is on this slide. You can feel free to call me, or you can feel free to email me, and I can send you almost all of what we have. And you can review it, take a look at it, see if it's something that would be helpful to you as you sort of make your plans. And if not, that's fine too. But yeah, we didn't create this ourselves. This was not our brainchild. This was something that's been going on for, like I said, 23 years. And everything that we do is based on the work and the effort and the blood, sweat, and tears of other people. And so we want to be free with kind of what we've done, and hope that it's helpful to people. Because really the goal is to have as many of these resources available to folks as possible. So shoot me an email and I'll send you virtually everything that we have.
Awesome. Yeah, that's exciting to hear that a center is being opened. Our next question asks, I'm wondering how you can get a person who is in severe distress and it is unsafe for people around them and they can't or won't get themselves into the living room. How would they be encouraged to utilize this program versus going to the emergency room or for those around them having to contact the police, which, as you said, is traumatizing itself?
Yeah, so again, an excellent question. It's a dilemma that we wrestle with frequently. Part of this is to sort of help. So I'm gonna talk about the context of, for instance, somebody in a group living environment. Part of the work is to sort of help the staff and the program manager and the clinical supports for that program kind of understand that before a situation gets to the point where a person is really angry, really frustrated, and folks are becoming concerned about their behavior, that we're telling them about their options really early, and that we want them to be doing that as kindly as possible. And if that's happening on the front end, and then people reach out to us, even if they're not able to provide transportation, there are opportunities for us to provide transportation. We can go out and pick someone up and bring them back. It's a lot easier to do if folks aren't feeling like they've been painted into a corner in the beginning and that their only response is one of anger and frustration. If we're telling people in the program, hey, there are options, there are new options, there's this new program, we hope that that will help a person feel less trapped, have more choices, and then we can talk to them about, do they want to come to the program? Do they need transportation to the program? And then we can provide that if at all possible. If people don't have that kind of work done on the front end and aren't being offered choices from the very beginning, and they do feel trapped, I think it's understandable. I behaved in this way. When you don't have options, frustration sets in. Frustration quickly boils over into anger. And when a person in the mental health system is angry, I think they're treated very differently than people in the general population who get angry.
Yeah.
Because of histories, because people have read their charts and don't understand the context of what's in those charts. So again, a lot of this is about sort of laying the groundwork, doing some education, providing supports, going out to programs and talking with the people who live in those programs about what it is that we do and what we offer and how they can access it. Because I think if people think that they and believe that they have choices, they're kind of less inclined to feel trapped. And when they don't feel trapped, they're kind of more open to a conversation and discussion about what it is that they need.
Yeah, absolutely. Our next question is whether a guest needs to have a diagnosis or if anyone can come in.
Anyone can come in. We don't care. We don't ask. We don't feel like it's important to us. If it's important to the guest to let us know, because it's kind of how they see their experience, that's fine. We're not judgmental about that at all. But there is no diagnosis required. There's no referral, no assessment, no evaluation. Anybody off the street can just walk up, ring the doorbell, knock on the door, and then we'll welcome them in and explore with them. Is this the right place? How can we be helpful? What's going on? That kind of thing.
Fantastic. How have you kept it from devolving into a drop-in center? And does your hospitality extend to individuals who come in under the influence of drugs or alcohol?
Yeah, so I don't want to get into the semantics of drop-in center versus the living room. It is kind of a drop-in model because again, people can come at any time. They can stay for as long or as little as they want. I'm sorry, what was the second part of the question?
It's if people who are under the influence of drugs or alcohol are also welcome.
Right. I think I said earlier, we do have a guideline about not admitting people who are under the influence. And again, the reason for that is we might have guests who have a history of struggling with alcohol and substance use. We want to make sure that they feel like this is a safe environment for them. I think there's always concern about people's ability to consent, to be responsible and accountable if they're under the influence. So we want to be mindful of that. Depending on the circumstances, we have bent that guideline, and we've allowed a couple of occasions people. Again, one of the big worries before we opened, and again, people always go to worst case scenario, right? Like, so the number one question is, what are you going to do if somebody's suicidal? Like, who are you going to call? The second question is, we're concerned about people using it as a drop-in, shooting heroin in the bathroom. Like again, worst case scenario.
Right.
That's not happened. Again, the flexibility being such an important part of what we do, we try to look at each instance on a person-by-person, case-by-case basis, and then try to make the best decision in terms of how we can support that person and maintain a safe environment. It's kind of like threading a moving needle. It's very different all the time, and we just don't want a blanket, yeah, no, we don't do that. Because if it makes sense for us to do it, we want to do it if possible. If it doesn't make sense for us to do it, that's the motivation behind, whatever kind of disposition we arrive at with the person.
Definitely. And this is a similar question. Are individuals able to stay there if they are homeless at that moment?
Yeah, we're not a shelter. That was another big concern, that we would become a de facto shelter for the area. That's not happened. I'm sorry?
Oh, I think you might have frozen.
Oh, okay. Is it okay now?
Yes.
Okay. So that was another one of those kind of concerns that people had, that we would become a de facto shelter for people without housing in the area. There were a couple times early on the first year where, despite having done presentations at the local police department, that they would pick someone up who was homeless, particularly in the wintertime, and they would drop them off at the living room, kind of not fully understanding the nature of the program. Again, we won't turn people away in the dead of winter who don't have a place to stay or who are planning on sleeping in a car. We make that exception all the time. We are really clear with people that it's not a shelter, but that we will do whatever we can to help them access a shelter if that's what they want, or to access other housing resources. It's a very, very challenging problem, and it's kind of heartbreaking at times to see there's such need, such limited resource. We have places where people could sleep, and yet that's not the primary purpose of the program. But again, on a person-by-person, case-by-case basis, we'll sort of talk over what makes sense and what we can do to provide not just support for that night or the next night, but also in general, how can we help that person find temporary housing? How can we help them fill out a housing authority application so they get on a list? How can we call shelters? How can we provide transportation to a shelter if that's what they want? All of those kinds of things. We don't want to leave people without options, I'm sorry. And we don't want people to have an experience of us as not trying to be as helpful as possible.
Great. And what are your hours of operation and how long can a guest stay?
Yep, we're 24/7. So as you can imagine, the last 5.5 months have been very, very different. Beginning, I think, middle of March, we closed the physical site in response to the pandemic and all the measures that our organization and the cities and the states were taking to manage the pandemic. So we closed the physical site and we moved everything to phone and virtual support. Again, huge thanks to the team at the living room for quickly developing this whole array of virtual safe spaces or virtual support groups that people could use that didn't have access to the physical site because we were closed. Phone support for people who didn't have access to the physical site because we were closed, but wanted to continue getting peer support. We reopened, I think, July 6th. We didn't reopen 24/7 to start, so I think it was like 8 in the morning until 10 p.m. We were physically on site, having people come for the day. We're trying to get back to 24-hour on-site, but right now we're sort of doing a hybrid of on-site support and phone and virtual support. People can stay, again, we look at it on a person-by-person basis. How many other guests do we have? How much need does this person have? We've had people stay one night. I think we've, again, the longest stay has been 5, maybe 6 nights. Because again, if we don't have any overnight guests and day after day the person says there's nobody here, can I stay the night? There's no reason for us to say no. If they need it and want it and it makes sense, then why would we say, no, you can't, the rule says maximum 2 nights. If we got busy and we were at capacity all the time and we had a waiting list, then we might more frequently adhere to the guideline of 2 nights, but that's not been the situation so far.
Great, thank you. And what is your average daily count and number of staff in the house each shift?
Yeah, right now, again, because we're in the middle of reopening because of the pandemic, we have a limit on the number of people who can physically be in the space right now. So the total number of people who can physically be in the space at any time right now is 5. 2 guests maximum, 2 staff, 2 peer specialists supporting folks in the environment, and then the peer program coordinator being there to support the staff, to provide supervision, to do other aspects of her job. So it's 5 total, 2 guests right now. As more of the sort of the restrictions are lifted, we will sort of increase the number of people that can be there. Our hope, obviously our desire, is to be able to do that as soon as possible, to get back to 24/7 as soon as possible. But some of that right now is out of our control. So we're just trying to, kind of do the best that we can until such time as we're able to fully open again.
Makes sense. And how do your guests spend the night? Do you have beds or do they lay down on couches?
Well, we have these recliners that kind of they fold flat. We have them in that room that I referenced earlier, where it's quiet, the door can be shut, people can just go in there. We have blankets, we have weighted blankets. People can go in there and sleep on the recliner. We can have people sleep on the couches if that's their preference. Because we're trying to make the distinction between being a living room program and being a peer run respite. We don't have beds, we don't have bedrooms, we don't have the space for that. We do have some other things. We have a washer and dryer, so if somebody's there for the day or for a night or 2 or 3, and they want to do their laundry, we can certainly help them with that. But we don't have beds. It's a point of contention amongst people, recliners aren't really that comfortable. Why don't you have beds? One of the reasons is it was a stipulation of the landlord in order for us to be able to lease the property. Again, his fear was that it would become this de facto shelter and people would be milling about out front and that kind of thing. That's not been a problem. It's not something that we're worried about. But that's kind of how we're set up for now, recliners and couches.
I think we just have time for maybe one more question. Have you ever had any dangerous situations and how were they handled?
I guess dangerousness is in the eye of the beholder. We've had some situations that have been very concerning. We had a situation where we had a guest and the guest's boyfriend or husband wanted to see her, was I think intoxicated, was yelling, screaming obscenities. They were told that they couldn't come in. They went around the back door. They pushed through the back door and past one of the peer specialists. It was a pretty scary situation. We asked that person to leave a number of times. Finally, they did. So there was that. We need to do a lot of kind of conversation and support of the staff and any guests that might have been in a situation like that, to just, again, make sure everybody is okay, if they're getting the support that they need, that we have the opportunity to talk through what happened and how we might be able to prevent that in the future. I think it comes with operating this kind of program. But again, out of the 2 years we've been open, it has only happened a couple of times.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that's about all the time we have. But yeah, thank you for this amazing presentation and for all the information you provided. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. I wanted to let you know that in the next couple months, we'll announce the date soon, but NEC is going to be hosting a series about youth leadership and how different organizations serving youth develop leadership among young people. So please stay tuned for that. And you should be receiving your certificate soon, in the next 24 hours. Thank you all so much and have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.